many of you in here, by a show of hands, like to take your parents' cameras when you were a kid and take pictures of events? Clearly a lot of people. I completely adored it. I would always steal the camera when it was time for family events or anything, so photography has always been a huge part of my life. And I just wanted to teach you the basics of it and how to get that perfect photo. For those of you that have issues of trying to come up with ideas for photography, there's tons of different types. There's things like, number one is a landscape photography, which will be like sunsets and mountain ranges in that example, or things like animals and wildlife photography, or up-close photography. Macro photography is my favorite. And like those of you that like sports, you could take pictures of people that are playing sports, or even if you find a building that looks cool and just take a picture of it. Or if you want to be more professional about it, you can do things like wedding photography, or like fashion photography, and portrait photography. And then I'm sure most of you have had to have a family portrait sometime in your life. It's a lot more fun when you're taking the picture, not having the picture taken of you. And then it's just so many different possibilities that you can do. I personally find photography to be difficult. Like, a lot of people don't put that much thought into it because there's a lot of rules of it. A big important rule of photography is called rule of thirds. And those of you that are taking photography class are nodding because you know about it. It's just pretty much trying to section up your photographs into different parts that'll help you like make the image look more interesting, I guess. Like how on the bottom the horizon follows that bottom line. It just kind of makes the photos more dynamic.
Oh, I never caught that. That's cool. Yeah, good call. I do it with videography, but I never thought putting the horizon on the bottom line.
It always just makes it more simple and easier to look at.
That's a good call.
With you also have to pay attention to backgrounds in photography. Like in this picture, obviously the subject is the only thing you're looking at because there's a black background. But if you were to have like an orchestra in the background, it'd really take away from that main person you're trying to get a picture of. Also, your viewpoint when you're taking a picture is extremely important, because if you have, like in this photo, the person is on a beach and you're above the beach looking down at it, which makes it look a lot more interesting. As to say, if you were down on the beach behind this little person, then it would make it look more flat and less interesting to look at. So
Did you take that?
No, these are all photographs and something else. But
good to know you're not photographing people unknowing at the beach.
No. Also, lighting is a huge part to photography. Obviously, you don't have to do something as extravagant as this lighting picture does, but just having good lighting in general matters, because if you have bad lighting, then your subject is really out of focus almost and lacks detail. And if you have too much lighting, then the person's just like bleached out and you can't see anything. So lighting is something that is extremely important in photography. Also, if you want to make just an interesting photo, symmetry is a cool thing to follow, because if you look at this photo, it's almost kind of calming because it looks very complete to the eye. If it were like cut off, like if you cut it off right here, it kind of distracts people because you're like, why don't you complete the rest of the window or something like that.
See, and I instantly saw Mexico and thought of Taco Bell. I'm not kidding you. That's exactly what I was
doing.
doing.
Taking pictures of matters too.
I have issues.
Also, lines is important. Like in this photo, it causes movement because your eyes want to naturally follow that line that's on the road. If like it doesn't have to be a really distinct line like a road. Like even the tree line here, like how there's a line with the trees, it kind of gives your eyes something to follow in the photo. Also, a depth in photo is kind of makes things more like complex and make it interesting.
I'm sorry, that's a bad photo.
Sheep on the side. I'm sure most of your eyes went to the sheep in the first place because it's in the foreground. And then obviously it travels more farther back as you watch the photo longer, and just makes you want to keep looking at the photo to keep discovering what else is in it. Balance is also kind of something that's important. I mean, if this sign was the only thing in this photo, it'd make it look really weighted and not make much sense as compared to with this building in it. It makes it kind of more balanced out, even though it's not symmetrical. It makes it still look a lot easier to look at instead of kind of distracting. And how many of you here, like, the first thing you look at here is either this log or in the center part here? Because that's kind of what this image is meant to do. It's called framing. And so your eyes naturally go over these dull things here and want to go towards the more entertaining things, I guess you could say. And so if you, it doesn't naturally.
Are these a general rule of thumb though for like a normal person?
Yeah.
Okay, because I was just curious when they set that up. 'Cause my eyes instantly went to the walk. I didn't see anything else.
Well, yeah, I mean, it does, that's just kind of like, when I looked up framing, this is kind of one of the photos that came up, and it's a good example, because you don't want to pay attention to all these black parts here,
Right.
and then this stands out completely because it's framed by all that light blue.
Gotcha.
And then finally, cropping a photo. I'm sure most of you have cropped a photo, and in this one, they zoomed in on these two individual ones to give it emotion, as compared to like having the background of all of these and make a photo look, I don't know, like less interesting if you had a bunch of them compared to just these main two. It kind of gives the photo a subject and makes it more interesting to look at. And then with cameras, the main camera that you're going to deal with in photography, like professional photography, is DSLR cameras, which most of you I'm sure is just know it as the camera that you can change lenses on. I didn't get one until this like past year, and I completely love it, but it's really confusing because there's.
But when you say it, I want to know why. What makes you love about it?
Because you can just have a higher quality of picture, and you can control a lot more. In a digital camera, you can't control as much. You just kind of snap the picture and it's done. And here you have these 4 different things that you kind of get to control in a photo, and I compare them to an eye to make them simpler to understand.
Okay.
Like in exposure, you have to, it's just how long the photograph is exposed for. So if you have a long exposure, it's like, let's say you're looking at an ocean and you take a picture of it with long exposure, then you'll have more of the waves like all kind of blend together than if you had a short exposure and make it like just kind of a still frame type thing. And ISO is just how sensitive your camera is to light in general. Aperture is also something that controls light. It's kind of like that little part that you look in the camera and it like grows bigger or grows smaller, and it just it's like your iris, like I compared it to. It lets in how much light is getting into that camera at that time. Shutter speed also goes with exposure because it's how fast that lens opens and closes. If it's like a shutter speed of a second, then it's going to be a lot longer than if you were taking photos of sports. You would want to try and have a short shutter speed because that way it kind of like freezes all action and movement instead of having it all long and drawn out and your picture doesn't turn out blurry. These are some of my personal photos that I've taken, and you can tell that like I put thought into them, but not necessarily all of them, because in 6, I didn't even mean to take that picture. I was trying to take a picture of the deer in the field behind it, and it kind of focused on those little leaves instead. So it shows you that you don't actually have to put tons and tons of thought into them. I mean, this one I had put thought into just for the fact that I wanted to pay attention to lighting. If I was on the side of the tree where there was no light coming through that ice, it would have looked a lot duller and wouldn't look as cool. But so, I mean, sometimes you just have to look through your lens at things. This guy I didn't even see. I was just trying to take a picture of sand, and I found this little plant there that I didn't even notice beforehand. So it just kind of have fun with it. You don't have to overthink it so much. And for those of you that have kind of been zoning out as to what I've been saying completely, just kind of a like view over all the main points. There's many types of photography. If you run out of ideas, you can just go look online and you'll find tons of different ideas. And it doesn't even have to be like things like full out landscapes or people. It could be buildings. I mean, it's whatever you find interesting that you want to capture. It helps to follow the rules. A lot of people obviously don't like following rules, but in this case, it'll make your photos look 10 times better. And photos aren't that bad, or cameras aren't that bad, because you're gonna probably try and freak out if you get a camera like this at first, because you're gonna think that it's gonna be so difficult to manage, but that shouldn't be keeping you from the photography itself, because photography is so much fun. And it's just simple and fun, and I hope you all would like doing it yourself.